the U.S. take on Chinese President Xi Jinping's meeting with the Russian President Putin? Is there more reason to cause concern? And is it still the U.S. assessment that China is not providing military and material assistance to Russia? Thank you.
Well, I'll start with the second part first. That still is our assessment. We made clear months ago now of information that was available to us, suggesting that the Russian Federation was seeking assistance, military assistance from the PRC for its war against Ukraine. We made very clear to the PRC, both in public but also at the highest levels, that we would be watching very closely, and any PRC effort to provide military assistance to Russia or to help Russia on a systematic basis circumvent the sanctions that had been put in place would incur significant costs, and we have not seen any change on the part of the PRC. Look, when it comes to President Xi's engagement today with President Putin, I will ultimately let those two presidents and those two governments speak to what was discussed. I've seen some initial statements emanate from this meeting. I imagine we'll see more in the coming hours. I suppose at this early hour, what is striking is President Putin's apparent admission, at least as stated in the media, that President Xi has concerns about Russia's war against Ukraine. It's not surprising that the PRC apparently has such concerns. It is somewhat curious that President Putin would be the one to admit it and to admit it so openly. I say it's not surprising because what we've seen the PRC resort to verbal and in many ways geopolitical gymnastics over recent months, trying to avoid criticizing Russia's war against Ukraine, at least trying to avoid criticizing it openly. After all, this is a war that is a blatant assault on Ukraine's sovereignty, but it is also at odds with everything the PRC has purported to believe in over the course of decades now. It is a constant refrain that we've heard from the PRC bilaterally, that we've heard from the PRC in multilateral settings, that we've heard from the PRC in the UN system. This principle, this what should be an inviolable principle of state sovereignty, has been under assault by Russia since February 24th, and in many ways for the 8 years before that. It's also not surprising that these two countries are coming together. We've said that President Putin, it's very clear, is looking for every conceivable lifeline he can find. He is turning to countries like the DPRK. He is turning to countries like Iran in the process. And when it comes to Russia and the PRC, it's true that they share a vision for the world. They share a vision for the world that is starkly at odds with the vision that's at the center of the international system, the vision that has been at the center of the international system for the past 8 decades. It is the vision that is at the heart of the UN system and the UN Charter, for that matter. So we've seen this relationship deepen, not over the course of days, weeks, or months, but over the course of years. Of course, we've seen this relationship move even more closely together. We've made very clear our concern about this deepening relationship and the concern that every country around the world should have about this relationship. Yes.
You mentioned that Putin is turning to DPRK and Iran for help. Do you have any information to confirm the expectation that Putin is asking Xi Jinping for support in person, given that Russia is facing...
I couldn't speak to what President Putin asked of President Xi today. That would be something to pose to President Putin. Jane.
There's a whole lot of China issues. President Xi Jinping and President Putin met at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit yesterday. They pledged to further expand the trade and economic cooperation. China is not cooperating in Russia's sanctions how do you think this will affect Russia's sanctions?
Sorry, repeat the end of that. How does, I didn't catch the end of the question.
How do you think this will affect Russia's sanctions because China not cooperating with Russia?
Well, as I just said to your colleague, it's very clear that Russia is looking for every conceivable lifeline. The fact that dozens of countries around the world have come together not only to impose sanctions and massive financial penalties, but also to mount export controls that have systematically starved Russia of the key inputs it needs for its industrial base, for its defense base, for its energy production, and for its technological base. And the fact that Russia is now turning to countries like Iran and the DPRK, I think speaks to the difficulty Russia is finding in indigenously producing what it needs for to prosecute its brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. I would leave it to the PRC to speak to the approach that they are taking towards this conflict, towards this war. As I said just a moment ago, they have had to go to extraordinary lengths to even attempt to explain how this brutal war of territorial conquest and aggression would not be automatically at odds with the vision of the world that they have put forward over the course of decades, and the emphasis that they have placed on the principle, the emphasis they have placed on the principle of sovereignty over the course of decades.
But China is ignoring Russia's purchase of North Korea's weapons. Do you think China is responsible for this? Why they ignore Russia and North Korea weapons trading? Chinese ignoring about this.
I couldn't speak to what the PRC's position is on Russia's purchase of millions of rounds from the DPRK. I would leave that to the PRC to characterize their position. Yes.
Just follow up. While you are expressing concerns over Russians seeking for help, do you actually have any sign that China is providing assistance to Russia?
We have information. We had information that we made public a number of months ago now that Russia was seeking security assistance from the PRC. As I said a moment ago to Nike, we made that public. We also made very public the fact that we would be watching very closely and that the PRC would incur significant costs if it provided military assistance to Russia in its war, or if it aided Russia in a systematic way evade the sanctions that the international community had imposed on it. We have not seen the PRC do either of those things.
And what is your impression, your take on this Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, which Mr. President Putin attended?
We are not a member of this organization. We'll leave it to members and others to characterize it.
And I just have a quick one on Taiwan. Yesterday, the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee just passed the Taiwan Policy Act. What is your reaction to that? Are you concerned this would further damage the U.S.-China relation?
Well, as we always or often do, our legislative teams here and members of the administration are in close touch with members of Congress. We'll continue to communicate directly and privately with members and their staffs about this legislation, like we do with draft legislation really across the board. For our part, the Biden administration, we have deepened our partnership with Taiwan. We'll continue to do so with effective diplomatic, economic, and military support. And we appreciate the strong bipartisan support for Taiwan that we're seeing in Congress and that we're seeing across the country.
Ned, can I follow
Let me move
on
around because we have many people.
policy
Yes, please. I just took the question on the Taiwan Policy Act.
Quickly, because you have said U.S. bipartisan one China policy is guided by 6 assurances, the Taiwan Relations Act and Joint Communique. Among the 6 assurances, I can quote, the United States would not formally recognize Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan, end of quote. And quote, the United States would not set a date for termination of arms sale to Taiwan, end of quote. Is there a need for Chinese government to be concerned about Taiwan Policy Act?
Nothing is changing about our approach to Taiwan. It is guided by our One China policy, the 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances, and the Taiwan Relations Act. Yes.